Welcome to Relatable Sleep Stories, where original bedtime stories for adults gently guide you toward deep, restful sleep. Whether tonight is your first visit or you're returning for another peaceful evening, I'm truly glad you're here. This is a place where you can leave the outside world behind for a little while and simply enjoy a peaceful journey, one story at a time. Each story is carefully written to help you leave the day behind and journey into comforting places, gentle adventures, and peaceful moments where your imagination can wander and your mind can finally rest. There is nothing expected of you here. Simply settle into your favorite sleeping position, make yourself comfortable, and allow the story to unfold at its own gentle pace. If sleep finds you before tonight's story reaches its ending, that's perfectly okay. The story will be here waiting whenever you return. Before we begin tonight's sleep story, let's take a few quiet moments to prepare your mind and body for a restful night's sleep. As you settle comfortably into your bed, allow yourself to simply arrive in this quiet moment. There is nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you need to accomplish. For the next little while, the outside world can continue without asking anything of you. You have reached a place where your only purpose is to rest. Take one slow, comfortable breath in, then gently let it drift back out. There is no perfect way to breathe, no rhythm to follow. Simply notice how each breath feels a little calmer than the one before. The day behind you has come to a close. Whatever it held, whether it was busy, peaceful, ordinary, or unexpected, has now become part of yesterday's journey. You carried yourself through it. You did enough. Now, this time belongs entirely to you. Imagine the world outside your room becoming a little quieter with every passing moment. The responsibilities, conversations, appointments, and unfinished tasks no longer need your attention. They can patiently wait until morning. Tonight asks nothing from you except your presence. Allow yourself to appreciate the comfort surrounding you. Notice the support beneath you. Feel the familiar weight of your blanket. Become aware of the quiet stillness of the room around you. There is something comforting about knowing that, for this moment, everything is exactly as it needs to be. Nothing needs to be solved. Nothing needs to be decided. Nothing needs to be hurried. Simply being here is enough. With each gentle breath, imagine yourself settling a little deeper into this peaceful moment. Not because you're trying to fall asleep, but because you've given yourself permission to simply rest. And sometimes, that's the most comforting feeling of all. As you continue resting here, notice how your body has already begun to settle on its own. The small muscles that carried you through the day begin to soften naturally. Your forehead feels smooth and untroubled. The gentle muscles around your eyes relax, allowing your eyelids to feel pleasantly heavy. There is no need to keep watch over the day anymore. Your jaw loosens comfortably. If you've been holding even the smallest trace of tension without realizing it, simply allow it to fade away. Let your tongue rest naturally. Each gentle breath reminds you that this moment belongs only to you. Notice the support beneath your head, your shoulders, your back, and every part of your body resting comfortably against the bed. Your shoulders become lighter. Your arms rest exactly where they feel most comfortable. That growing sense of ease travels through your hands to your fingertips, where every small movement comes to rest. Your breathing remains calm and effortless. Simply allow each gentle breath to arrive and quietly drift away again. As your body grows more comfortable, your legs begin to feel pleasantly heavy against the mattress. Your knees, your calves, your ankles, and finally, your feet settle into complete stillness. Every part of you is supported and completely at ease. With each passing moment, comfort replaces effort. Stillness replaces tension. Quiet gently settles where the busy pace of the day once was. Little by little, your entire body begins to feel as though it has found exactly where it was always meant to rest. As your body grows more comfortable, you may still notice thoughts passing gently through your mind. That is completely natural. The mind doesn't become quiet all at once. It simply slows, little by little, as it realizes there is nothing more to do today. If a thought appears, simply notice it, then let it quietly drift away. There is no need to follow it or hold on to it. Remain here, resting peacefully, while each thought comes and goes like a passing cloud. With every gentle breath, the spaces between your thoughts begin to grow a little wider. Those quiet spaces become moments of stillness, where your mind can rest just as peacefully as your body. If tomorrow briefly comes to mind, allow it to remain where it belongs. In tomorrow. Morning will arrive in its own time. Tonight offers you something much simpler. A quiet moment. A peaceful place to simply be. Notice how calm begins to feel more familiar than busy, how stillness becomes more inviting than rushing. Everything important can wait until the sun rises again. There is nothing you need to solve. This moment is already enough. As that peaceful feeling continues to grow, your mind becomes a little softer, a little lighter, and a little more ready to quietly begin tonight's sleep story. By now, the world around you has become wonderfully quiet. The day has gently slipped behind you, leaving only a peaceful sense of calm. Your body feels comfortably settled. Your breathing has found its own gentle rhythm. Your thoughts have grown softer, making room for something peaceful to unfold. In just a few moments, you'll be invited into another place. A place where life moves a little more slowly, where every path, familiar sound, and quiet moment welcomes you to simply enjoy the journey. There is no hurry waiting for you there, only a peaceful world, patiently waiting to welcome you. Allow your curiosity to awaken gently, not the kind that keeps you awake, but the quiet kind that makes you wonder what peaceful place awaits just ahead. Perhaps you'll discover a place you've never visited before, or perhaps you'll find yourself somewhere that feels strangely familiar, as though you've known it all along. Wherever tonight's story leads, simply allow it to carry you at its own gentle pace. If sleep finds you before the story reaches its ending, then it has done exactly what it was meant to do. Take one final slow, comfortable breath. Feel the calm you've created. Enjoy the quiet you've welcomed. And know that, for the next little while, there is nowhere else you need to be. Now, let's quietly begin tonight's sleep story. In the autumn of 1887, in a small hillside town called Bellwether Lane, there stood an old bookstore at the end of Market Street, where the cobblestones dipped toward the river, and the shop windows glowed like lanterns when evening came early. The town was not large enough to be printed on every traveler's map, but it was known by carriage drivers, railway porters, and wandering merchants as a pleasant place to stop when the weather turned poor. It had one narrow main street, one stone bridge, one modest hotel with ivy climbing the side wall, and a row of shops that leaned close together as though they had been sharing secrets for generations. On that particular afternoon, rain had been falling since noon. It was not a harsh rain, nor a storm with thunder rattling the window panes. It was the soft, steady kind of autumn rain that seemed to settle over everything gently. It darkened the wooden signs above the shops, gathered in silver beads along iron railings, and made the fallen leaves cling to the road in patches of amber, brown, and gold. The air smelled faintly of wet stone, chimney smoke, horse leather, and apples from the grocer's baskets, which had been pulled beneath the awning to keep them dry. By 5:30, night had already begun to gather. Gas lamps flickered to life one by one along Market Street, their golden circles trembling in the puddles below. Shopkeepers stepped outside to draw in their signs. A baker shook crumbs from his apron before locking his door. A milliner tilted a hat display away from the damp window. Across the street, an old clock above the post office struck the hour with a patient, hollow tone that drifted through the rain. At the far end of the street, just before the road bent toward the bridge, the bookstore remained open. Its sign was painted in dark green letters on a cream-colored board: Wren and Willow Booksellers. The paint had weathered at the edges, and the brass bell above the door had long ago lost most of its shine, but there was something inviting about the place. Warm light spilled from its windows onto the wet pavement. Behind the glass, tall shelves could be seen rising nearly to the ceiling, crowded with books of every size and color. Some stood straight and proud, others leaned tiredly against their neighbors. A few were stacked sideways where there had been no room left to fit them properly. Inside, the shop smelled of paper, polished wood, lamp oil, and old leather bindings softened by time. A fire burned quietly in a small iron stove near the back wall. Its warmth moved through the narrow aisles, taking the chill from the air without disturbing the peaceful hush that belonged to the room. Rain whispered against the windows. Somewhere in the ceiling, the old timbers gave a small creak now and then, as if the building was settling itself for the night. Behind the counter sat Mr. Abel Wren, the bookseller. He was a thin man with silver hair, round spectacles, and hands that moved carefully, as if every object deserved patience. He had owned the shop for nearly 40 years, and in that time he had learned that books came and went much like people. Some arrived proudly in parcels tied with string. Some were brought in by families clearing attic trunks. Some appeared unexpectedly, tucked inside boxes of things no one wanted anymore. And some, he believed, were never truly lost. They merely waited, On the rainy evening when this story begins, Mr. Wren was writing in his ledger by the glow of an oil lamp. He had nearly decided to close early when the bell above the door gave a soft ring. A gentleman stepped inside, removing his hat as he entered. He was perhaps 40 years old, with a calm face, dark hair touched faintly with grey at the temples, and a travel coat damp from the rain. He paused just inside the doorway, not from hesitation, but from the quiet habit of a person who liked to understand a room before moving through it. His eyes travelled over the shelves, the lamps, the old counter, the stove, and finally the narrow staircase that led to the second level of books above. Mr. Wren looked up from his ledger. "Good evening, sir. Miserable weather for travelling?" The gentleman smiled slightly and brushed a few drops of rain from his sleeve. "Indeed it is, though I have found poor weather is often kind to bookshops." "That is because sensible people come in out of the rain," Mr. Wren said, "and less sensible people go out in it looking for books." The old bookseller gave a quiet laugh and closed his ledger. "Then I suspect you belong to the second sort." "I am afraid so," the gentleman said. "My name is Thomas Elwood. I am passing through Bellwether Lane for the night." "A pleasure, Mr. Elwood. Are you looking for anything in particular, or simply shelter?" Thomas glanced toward the shelves with the expression of a man who had asked himself that question many times in many towns. "A bit of both, perhaps. But I have a particular interest in the works of Clara Whitcomb." At the sound of the name, Mr. Wren's eyebrows lifted with mild surprise. Clara Whitcomb. Now there is a name one does not hear every day. Thomas stepped nearer the counter, his attention sharpening gently. "You know her work?" "I know of it. Quiet novels. Country houses, old villages, families with long memories. She never sold like the louder writers, but those who loved her seemed to love her dearly." "That is well said," Thomas replied. "I have spent several years collecting her early editions." "Several years? Longer than I intended." Mr. Wren nodded, as though this was something he understood. "Books have a way of extending a journey." "They do." Outside, a carriage rolled slowly past the window, its wheels cutting through shallow water along the street. The horse's hooves sounded soft and heavy on the wet stones. Thomas watched the blurred shape pass, then turned back to the shelves. "I was told," he said, "that your shop sometimes carries older volumes from estate collections." "Sometimes," Mr. Wren said, "though they arrive when they please and leave in much the same manner. I am searching especially for a first edition of The Orchard House." The title seemed to settle into the air between them. For a moment, Mr. Wren said nothing. He looked toward the back of the shop, where the shelves were deeper and less orderly, then tapped one finger lightly against the counter. "The Orchard House," he murmured. "That would have been among her earliest books if memory serves." "Her second novel," Thomas said, "printed in 1851. Fewer copies than the later editions. Most were bound in green cloth with a small gilt branch stamped on the cover." Mr. Wren looked pleased. "You do know your books?" "I try to know the ones I love." There was nothing boastful in the way Thomas said it. He spoke softly, almost as though he were making a confession. He had not begun collecting rare books because of their value, though some had become valuable enough. He had begun because, as a younger man, he had once found a worn copy of Clara Whitcomb's first novel in a railway station waiting room during one of the loneliest winters of his life. He had read it by lamplight in unfamiliar inns, beside cold train windows, and once on a delayed carriage while snow covered the road ahead. The book had not changed his life in any grand way. It had not made him wealthy, brave or wise, but it had kept him company, and sometimes companionship was enough to turn a difficult season into something bearable. Since then, he had searched for her books wherever his travels carried him. Mr. Wren reached for a small brass key beneath the counter. "I may have something," he said. Thomas grew still. The bookseller noticed and smiled. "No promises. Old memory is an unreliable catalogue, but I purchased several boxes last spring, from the estate of a retired solicitor in Westmere. There were some quiet novels among them. I placed them upstairs and meant to sort them properly." "May I look?" "Of course. Mind the third step, it complains." Mr. Wren took the lamp from the counter and led the way toward the staircase. Thomas followed, carrying his hat in one hand. As they climbed, the shop seemed to grow even quieter. The sound of the rain softened below them. The air upstairs was warmer near the ceiling, and smelled more strongly of dust, cloth and old bindings. The second floor was no more than a narrow gallery that wrapped around the walls, protected by a wooden railing, polished smooth by time. Shelves stood close together here, some labelled, some not. At the far end, beneath a sloped portion of roof where the rain tapped directly overhead, several unopened crates rested beside a small table. Mr. Wren set the lamp down. "These are the Westmere books," he said. "I sorted the histories, the sermons, and the travel writings. The novels remain neglected, poor things." Thomas knelt beside the nearest crate. There was a pleasure in this kind of searching that he had never been able to explain to people who did not love books. It was not only the hope of finding something rare, it was the quiet permission to handle the past gently. Each volume carried traces of other rooms, other hands, other evenings when someone had turned its pages beside a fire or near a window or in bed while the household slept. He lifted out 3 books at once, then sorted them carefully on the table. A red copy of poems, a brown novel with a cracked spine, a blue volume of essays. The rain continued its patient tapping overhead. Mr. Wren watched for a while, then began searching another crate, reading titles in a low voice. Occasionally he made a sound of recognition, or mild disappointment. Thomas worked slowly, brushing dust from covers with the side of his hand, turning each book just enough to read the spine. Nearly 20 minutes passed. Downstairs the fire shifted in the stove with a soft metallic sigh. Then Mr. Wren said, "Ah!" Thomas looked up. The bookseller was holding a small green volume. The cover was faded, and one corner had softened with age, but near the center, barely catching the lamplight, was a gilt branch stamped into the cloth. Thomas rose carefully. Mr. Wren placed the book on the table between them. Neither man touched it for a moment. The title, dulled but readable, rested across the spine in narrow gold letters, "The Orchard House." Thomas let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "May I?" "Of course." He lifted the book with both hands. It was lighter than he expected, and yet it seemed to carry a strange weight of years. The cloth was worn smooth along the edges. The pages, seen from the side, had darkened to the color of weak tea. He opened the cover just far enough to see the title page. There it was. Clara Whitcomb. First edition. For several seconds he said nothing. Mr. Wren, who had sold many books in his life but had never grown tired of watching someone find the one they had hoped for, waited quietly. At last Thomas closed the book with care. "How much?" The old bookseller named a fair price, perhaps lower than the book deserved. Thomas accepted without bargaining. Some purchases, he believed, ought not be disturbed by negotiation. They returned downstairs just as the clock across the street struck 6. The sound came faintly through the rain, followed by the turning of keys in several nearby shop doors. Bellwether Lane was closing for the evening. Mr. Wren wrapped the book in brown paper and tied it with string. "A fine night to take a treasure back to your room," he said. Thomas smiled. "A fine night to read one. Are you staying at the Bellwether Hotel?" "Yes." "Then you've only a short walk. Keep it beneath your coat. The rain has no respect for first editions." Thomas tucked the parcel carefully under his arm and put on his hat. "Thank you, Mr. Wren." "Good evening, Mr. Elwood. And mind the puddles. They are deeper than they look." Thomas stepped out into the rainy autumn night, the bell giving one soft ring behind him. The street was nearly empty now. The lamps glowed warmly through the mist, and the bookstore window shone behind him like a small golden memory. Thomas stood for a moment beneath the bookstore's small awning, drawing his coat more securely around the neatly wrapped parcel tucked beneath his arm. Rain continued to fall with quiet determination, its gentle rhythm filling the evening with a peaceful sort of silence. It was not the silence of emptiness but the comforting hush that arrives when a busy town slowly settles itself to sleep. He glanced once more through the glowing bookstore window. Mr. Wren had already returned to his ledger. The bookseller looked perfectly content beneath the warm lamplight, as though he had spent thousands of evenings exactly the same way, and hoped to spend thousands more. For just a moment, Thomas wondered how many remarkable books had quietly passed through those patient hands over the years. Perhaps treasures beyond imagination had rested upon that worn wooden counter before finding homes elsewhere. The thought made him smile. He tipped his hat toward the window, though he doubted the bookseller noticed, then stepped away into the rainy evening, the cool air greeted him immediately. Tiny droplets gathered along the brim of his hat before falling silently to the cobblestones below. His boots made soft splashes through shallow puddles, each step producing a gentle sound that blended naturally with the rain. The wrapped book remained tucked safely beneath his coat, protected from the dampness just as Mr. Wren had suggested. The rain has no respect for first editions. The old bookseller's words returned to him with quiet amusement. Thomas had heard similar expressions from collectors throughout the years. Books, they often said, feared three enemies above all others: fire, water, careless hands. He had managed to avoid all three remarkably well. As he walked, Bellwether Lane seemed transformed by the arrival of night. During daylight it had appeared cheerful and welcoming, but now the little town possessed a different kind of beauty altogether. Gas lamps lined the street at comfortable intervals, each surrounded by a glowing halo that shimmered softly through the rain. Reflections stretched across the wet stones like ribbons of melted gold. Most of the shop windows had gone dark. Only a few remained illuminated. The baker was stacking tomorrow morning's bread baskets. The apothecary extinguished one lamp after another before drawing heavy curtains across the windows. Farther along the street, laughter drifted briefly from a small public house before the door closed once more, leaving only the rain behind. Thomas found himself walking more slowly than necessary. There was no reason to hurry. His hotel was only a short distance away, and evenings like this rewarded an unhurried pace. The rain carried with it countless familiar scents. Fresh wood smoke curled lazily from brick chimneys. Wet leaves gathered beneath iron fences. Someone nearby had recently brewed tea, its comforting fragrance escaping through a kitchen window before disappearing into the cool autumn air. A carriage passed at little more than walking speed. The driver nodded politely. Thomas returned the greeting. Soon the carriage disappeared into the mist beyond the bridge, leaving only the steady rhythm of hoofbeats fading into the distance. He often believed every town possessed its own evening voice. Some spoke loudly with music and conversation. Others whispered. Bellwether Lane whispered. Its sounds never competed with one another. Instead, each became part of a peaceful melody. The rain upon rooftops, distant footsteps, an occasional door closing gently, the low crackle of fireplaces hidden behind stone walls. It reminded Thomas why he preferred traveling in autumn. Summer towns were lively, winter towns hurried, autumn towns simply breathed. The Bellwether Hotel soon appeared ahead, its windows glowing warmly against the rainy darkness. Unlike the bookstore, which invited quiet discovery, the hotel offered something equally comforting: rest. Its brick exterior was covered with climbing ivy, whose leaves had turned deep shades of crimson and copper. Rainwater dripped steadily from the vines, collecting in neat rows along the stone foundation, before disappearing into narrow drains beside the street. A polished brass lantern hung above the entrance. Its warm flame swayed gently behind glass each time the wind stirred. Thomas climbed the short set of stone steps, and paused just long enough to wipe the worst of the rain from his boots before stepping inside. Warmth embraced him immediately. It felt almost tangible after the cool evening outside. A large fireplace occupied one wall of the lobby, where oak logs burned with steady orange flames. Their gentle crackling filled the room with a comforting sound that reminded Thomas of countless inns he had visited throughout the country. The scent of cedarwood mingled with polished furniture and fresh beeswax candles. Someone had recently arranged autumn branches inside a tall ceramic vase near the staircase. Their golden leaves glowed softly beneath the lamplight. The hotel keeper looked up from behind the reception desk. "Good evening again, Mr. Elwood." "Good evening. Wet walk?" "A pleasant one." The elderly gentleman smiled knowingly. "There is a difference." "There certainly is. I've had cook keep a kettle warm should you care for tea." "That would be wonderful. I'll have it sent up directly." Thomas thanked him before climbing the broad wooden staircase toward the second floor. The steps creaked pleasantly beneath his weight. Not loudly. Simply enough to remind visitors that many travelers had climbed them before. His room sat near the end of the hallway overlooking Market Street. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and closed it quietly behind him. The room welcomed him with gentle simplicity. A comfortable chair rested beside a small fireplace where glowing embers still lingered from an earlier fire. A writing desk stood beneath the window. Heavy burgundy curtains framed the rain-speckled glass. An oil lamp waited neatly trimmed beside the bed. His leather travel case rested exactly where the maid had placed it earlier that afternoon. Everything appeared orderly, peaceful, comfortably familiar. Thomas removed his damp coat and carefully hung it beside the door. Next came his hat. His gloves. Finally, he placed the wrapped book upon the writing desk. He stood looking at it for several moments. There was something quietly satisfying about the parcel. The brown paper had been folded with care. The string crossed neatly at the center before ending in a tidy knot. Mr. Wren had wrapped it as though preparing a gift rather than completing a sale. Thomas smiled. Some books deserve that sort of respect. He lit the oil lamp. Its flame grew slowly before filling the room with warm amber light. Outside, rain continued its steady conversation with the window panes. Every so often a stronger breeze carried droplets against the glass with a soft pattering sound. The fire responded with an occasional gentle pop. Thomas settled comfortably into the chair. The hotel servant knocked lightly before entering with a silver tray carrying a steaming teapot, delicate china cup, and a small plate holding 2 butter biscuits. "I hope this helps warm the evening, sir." "It already has." After the servant departed, Thomas poured himself a cup. The fragrant steam drifted upward. He took one slow sip before setting the cup aside. Only then did he reach for the parcel. His fingers untied the string without breaking it. Old habits. Collectors rarely destroyed wrapping if it could be preserved. The paper unfolded easily. There, resting quietly beneath the lamplight, lay his newest treasure. The green cloth binding looked even older now than it had inside the bookstore. The gold branch upon the cover had faded almost beyond recognition, yet it possessed the unmistakable dignity that only time could give. Thomas gently brushed one fingertip across the cover. He wondered who had first purchased it. Had it belonged to a schoolteacher, a family, a quiet reader who returned to it every autumn? Books rarely revealed such things. Yet traces always remained. A pressed flower, a penciled note, an old receipt. Sometimes nothing at all, except softened corners, where countless hands had turned the pages. He opened the cover carefully. The paper crackled softly with age. The title page appeared exactly as before. He admired the elegant lettering for another quiet moment, before turning the next page. Then another. He was in no hurry. Collectors understood that anticipation formed part of the pleasure. Each page felt like greeting an old friend for the first time. The room remained wonderfully still. Rain. Fire. Tea. The faint ticking of a brass mantel clock. Thomas continued turning pages one by one. Then, something shifted. A slight thickness between 2 pages near the middle of the book. Almost too subtle to notice. He paused. His fingers remained perfectly still. Very carefully, he eased the pages apart. A folded piece of cream-colored paper rested quietly inside. For a heartbeat he simply stared. It did not resemble an ordinary bookmark, nor a forgotten receipt. The paper appeared heavier, older. Its edges had yellowed gently with age. Folded 3 times with remarkable precision. Holding the pages together was a small seal of deep crimson wax. The wax had darkened over the decades but remained perfectly intact. Pressed into its center was a tiny emblem. A flowering branch, the very same branch stamped in faded gold upon the cover of the first edition. Thomas scarcely breathed. His pulse quickened, though the room itself remained peacefully quiet. He had discovered many forgotten things inside old books over the years. Never anything like this. Thomas remained perfectly still. The folded paper rested quietly between the pages, as though it had been waiting for this very moment for decades. The room itself seemed to grow even quieter around him. The rain continued its gentle rhythm against the window. The fire settled with a soft sigh. Even the ticking of the small brass clock upon the mantel appeared slower now, each second passing with patient certainty. He found himself looking not at the letter itself, but at the wax seal. It was no larger than a shilling. Time had darkened its once bright crimson color into something closer to burgundy, yet its edges remained remarkably sharp. Whoever had sealed it had done so with great care. Pressed into the center was the image of a flowering apple branch, identical to the small gilt branch embossed upon the cover of the orchard house. Thomas gently turned the book toward the lamplight. There could be no mistake. The designs matched perfectly. His heartbeat quickened with quiet excitement. Collectors often dreamed of discoveries such as this, but dreams and reality rarely crossed paths. Forgotten newspaper clippings, pressed flowers, handwritten names upon flyleaves. Those things appeared from time to time. A sealed letter bearing the same emblem as the first edition itself. Never. He rested the book upon the desk. His hands remained folded in his lap for several moments. There was no urgency. The letter had waited more than 30 years. It could wait another minute. Thomas lifted his teacup and took another slow sip. The tea had cooled slightly, but remained pleasantly warm. Steam drifted upward in thin ribbons before disappearing into the glow of the oil lamp. His eyes returned again to the letter. Who had placed it there? More importantly, who had never found it? The question lingered pleasantly within his thoughts. He considered several possibilities. Perhaps a reader had hidden a personal note before lending the book to a friend. Perhaps a bookseller long ago had tucked away some forgotten receipt. Or perhaps his attention settled once more upon the wax seal. No, whatever this was, it had been prepared deliberately. He reached forward at last. With careful fingers he lifted the folded paper from between the pages. It felt surprisingly heavy, not because of its weight, but because the paper itself had been handmade. Its surface carried tiny, irregular fibers visible beneath the lamplight. It was thicker than ordinary writing paper, possessing a texture that modern paper rarely achieved. Thomas turned it over slowly. There was no address, no name, only the wax seal. His thumb hovered above it. Collectors often faced small decisions that others never considered. Should a letter remain forever unopened, or had it been intended to be read? He smiled faintly. If its writer had wished to hide it forever, she would never have placed it inside a published first edition. Very gently he slid a small ivory letter knife beneath the folded edge of the wax. The seal separated with hardly any resistance. Remarkably, it did not crumble. Instead it released with a soft, satisfying crack. Thomas laid the broken seal carefully beside the book. Even that tiny fragment deserved preserving. He unfolded the first crease, then the second, finally the third. The paper opened into a single handwritten page. The handwriting immediately caught his attention. Elegant, measured, confident. Every letter appeared carefully formed, without becoming stiff or formal. The ink had faded from deep black to a warm brown over the years, yet every word remained perfectly readable. Near the bottom, a familiar signature. Clara Whitcomb. Thomas stared. He had spent years examining her signatures in libraries, auction catalogues, and published letters. There was no doubt. He was looking at her own hand. For several seconds he simply admired the page itself. He noticed how evenly the lines were spaced, how little ink had blotted upon the paper, how gently the nib had curved through each graceful letter. It felt strangely personal. Not because of what it said. He had not yet read a single word. Simply because handwriting carried something of the writer within it. It preserved rhythm, patience, temperament. Thomas almost felt as though Clara Whitcomb herself had only recently risen from the desk. At last, he began reading. To whoever should one day discover this little letter. If these words have reached your hands, then it pleases me greatly to know that this humble volume has continued its journey long after leaving mine. Books possess curious lives. We imagine ourselves their owners, though I have long suspected we merely care for them during one chapter of their existence before quietly passing them onward. Perhaps you are a collector. Perhaps merely a traveler seeking shelter from rain. Perhaps you have found this entirely by accident. Whatever the circumstance, I thank you for opening these pages with gentle hands. There is a story that inspired The Orchard House. It has never appeared within any of my novels, nor have I spoken of it publicly, not because it is sorrowful, nor because it is extraordinary, but because some memories seem happier when entrusted to only a single listener at a time. Should you continue reading beyond this letter, I hope you will carry that memory kindly. For stories, much like gardens, flourish best when tended with patience. With gratitude. Clara Whitcomb. Thomas lowered the page. He did not move. The fire crackled softly behind him. Rain continued its endless conversation beyond the window. He read the letter once more. Then a third time. Each reading seemed gentler than the last. It was not a dramatic letter. There were no hidden fortunes. no mysterious maps, no family secrets. Instead, it invited him into something quieter. A memory. Thomas smiled. Some would surely have been disappointed. Many readers searched old books hoping for adventure. He found himself grateful that he had discovered something infinitely rarer. Kindness. He carefully examined the remaining pages of the orchard house. Nothing else had been hidden. No additional letters, no photographs, no pressed flowers. Only the novel itself. He wondered whether Clara Whitcomb had placed the letter there personally. Had she folded it herself? Pressed the warm wax seal with her own hands, closed the cover knowing someone, perhaps decades later, might discover it. The thought filled him with quiet wonder. His gaze drifted toward the rain-speckled window. Beyond the glass, Bellwether Lane had almost completely fallen asleep. Only a handful of windows still glowed. A lone carriage crossed the bridge at an unhurried pace before disappearing into the darkness. The gas lamps reflected beautifully upon the wet streets below. Thomas leaned back comfortably. His thoughts wandered. He remembered the countless miles he had traveled searching for forgotten books, hundreds of bookshops, thousands of shelves, entire days spent examining dusty crates remarkably similar to those upstairs in Mr. Wren's bookstore. Until tonight, he had often questioned whether such journeys were worth the effort. Rare books were satisfying to own. Yet ownership alone had never truly been his purpose. He had always hoped, perhaps foolishly, to discover something that made the journey itself meaningful. Tonight, he believed he finally had. Not because the letter might possess monetary value. Quite the opposite. Its value rested entirely within the quiet feeling it awakened. It reminded him why books mattered, not because they survived, but because they connected strangers separated by generations. An author. A reader. Another reader. Another. Until eventually, someone sat beside a hotel fire on a rainy autumn evening, holding words written more than 30 years earlier. Thomas folded the letter exactly as he had found it. 3 careful folds. Nothing hurried. Nothing forced. He did not return it immediately to the book. Instead he placed it upon the writing desk, where the lamplight illuminated every graceful line of handwriting. His eyes settled upon one sentence once again. There is a story that inspired the orchard house. He whispered the words softly. A story. His curiosity returned immediately. Not restless curiosity. Gentle curiosity. The kind that encourages patience rather than urgency. He suspected Clara Whitcomb had intended precisely that. She had not explained the story. She had merely opened its door. Thomas smiled once more. Tomorrow morning, before continuing his travels, he would pay another visit to Mr. Abel Wren. Not because he questioned the book's authenticity, nor because he wished to return it, but because he wondered whether the old bookseller knew anything at all about Clara Whitcomb's connection to Bellwether Lane. Perhaps, just perhaps, the little town held one more story waiting patiently to be discovered. Morning came softly to Bellwether Lane. The rain had passed before dawn, leaving the town washed clean and bright beneath a pale autumn sky. Water still clung to the window ledges, gathered in the hollows of the cobblestones, and trembled upon the last gold leaves that held to the trees along Market Street. Thomas slept little, though he did not feel tired. Some discoveries were too gentle to disturb sleep, and too wonderful to allow much of it. After breakfast, he placed the orchard house and Clara Whitcomb's letter carefully into his satchel, and returned to Wren and Willow booksellers. Mr. Wren was just unlocking the door when Thomas arrived. "You've come early," the bookseller said. "I found something in the book." Mr. Wren looked at him over his spectacles. "Did you?" Thomas unfolded the letter upon the counter. The old man read it slowly. When he reached the signature, his expression softened. "Well," he whispered, "so she did leave one behind." Thomas looked up. "You knew?" "Only a rumor," Mr. Wren said. "Years ago, an elderly woman told me Miss Whitcomb once stayed in Bellwether Lane while finishing the orchard house. She lodged at the old inn near the river, and spent many afternoons walking beyond town, toward a little abandoned orchard." "The orchard from the book?" "Perhaps. The trees are mostly gone now, but the hill remains." A quiet warmth moved through Thomas. "Could you show me?" So, later that morning, when the streets had begun to dry, and the town smelled of rain, leaves, and fresh bread, Mr. Wren led Thomas across the stone bridge. and up a narrow path beyond the last cottages. The hill was gentle. Wet grass brushed against their boots. Far below, Bellwether Lane rested in its hollow, with chimney smoke rising in thin blue threads, and the river curving around the town like a ribbon. At the top stood 3 old apple trees. Their branches were crooked, moss-darkened and nearly bare, yet a few small apples still hung beneath the leaves. Beyond them stood the foundation of a cottage long gone, its stones softened by lichen and time. Thomas stood quietly. He could imagine Clara Whitcomb there, years earlier, pausing beneath those same trees with a notebook in hand, listening to the wind, and seeing not ruin, but a story. Mr. Wren pointed toward the largest tree. "They say she sat there often." Thomas stepped closer. At the base of the tree, half hidden beneath fallen leaves, was a flat stone. Its surface held no name, only the carved shape of a small flowering branch. The same branch. Thomas felt something settle peacefully inside him. Not surprise, not triumph, something gentler. Understanding. Clara had not hidden a letter to reveal a secret fortune, or a scandal, or anything meant to startle the world. She had left it as a small bridge between herself and one future reader, a reminder that stories did not belong only to the people who wrote them. They belonged also to those who carried them kindly. Thomas took the letter from his satchel and read it once more beside the old tree. The words felt different there. Fuller somehow, as though the place had answered them. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully and returned it to the book. "I think," he said softly, "it should stay with the first edition." Mr. Wren nodded. "I believe she would like that." They returned to town as the afternoon light warmed the windows, and the wet streets began to shine. At the bookstore, Thomas bought a second, ordinary copy of The Orchard House for reading during his travels. The first edition, he wrapped again with care. Not to hide it, to protect it. Before leaving Bellwether Lane the next morning, Thomas wrote a note of his own. He placed it with Clara's letter inside the book, not beside it as an explanation, but gently behind it as another quiet chapter. It said only, "Found on a rainy autumn evening in Bellwether Lane. Kept with gratitude by Thomas Elwood, who understood why it was left." Years later, the book would pass from his hands to another careful reader, and then to another. Each would find Clara's letter and Thomas's note, and each would feel, for a little while, that they had been trusted with something tender, and perhaps that was how some stories were meant to live, not loudly, not famously, but gently, passed from hand to hand, room to room, evening to evening, like lamplight in a window, like rain on old glass, like a book waiting patiently on a shelf, until the right person came in from the weather and opened it.